Hello. I want to thank the conference organizers for allowing me to present remotely. I want to start today with a land acknowledgement for the land that I'm currently residing on. We collectively acknowledge that Michigan State University occupies the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe, Three Fires Confederacy of Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi peoples. In particular, the university resides on land ceded in the 1819 Treaty of Saginaw. We recognize, support, and advocate for the sovereignty of Michigan's 12 federally recognized Indian nations, for historic Indigenous communities in Michigan, for Indigenous individuals and communities who live here now, and for those who were forcibly removed from their homelands. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty and will work to hold Michigan State University more accountable to the needs of American Indian and Indigenous peoples. The indiscipline of MAD studies emerged from long-standing activist movements that began in the latter 20th century. These movements centered people who self-identified as MAD and sought to place MAD experiences at the center of discourse and praxis about madness. They also worked to reclaim MAD knowledge and experiences from PSY professionals like psychiatrists and psychologists, and to refuse medicalized notions of madness and distress. In 2008, Ingram coined the term indiscipline to describe MAD studies in order to preserve the unruliness and subversiveness of madness. As an international indiscipline, MAD studies has academic roots in Canada via the edited volume MAD Matters, a critical reader in Canadian MAD studies. In the introduction, Menzies et al. Described MAD studies as a project of inquiry, knowledge production, and political action devoted to the critique and transcendence of psi-centered ways of thinking, behaving, relating, and being. Proponents suggested working together to create possibilities for support, education, and research beyond the medical paradigm. With activism at its root, MAD studies has liberatory aims. I have chosen to use the words mad and madness as a way to both reclaim a stigmatized identity and to participate in MAD studies, which I argue is a valuable indiscipline for music education. Reclaiming language that has been used in a derogatory way can serve as a mechanism of empowerment. This terminology, however, is quite contested, and many do not wish to, or have the privilege to be able to, identify as MAD given its negative connotations. Employing such politicized language may prove dangerous for people who also experience violence and oppression at the intersections of racism, sexism, heterosexism, classism, cissexism, and beyond, and thus have challenging and potentially coercive encounters with psi systems that white MAD people might not experience. Language to use describe MAD experiences include mental illness, survivor, service user, mental health, neurodiversity, people with experiences of mental and emotional distress, or individuals who experience mental disorder. In considering terminology, Spandler and Personadu observed MAD studies, like the MAD movements that preceded it, seeks to subvert negative connotations associated with the term MAD and reclaim it and politicize it, like queer, fat, crip, and so on. In societies where madness is usually seen only negative as dangerous, and the idea of reclaiming it as part of our fabric is potentially challenging and unsettling. It is worth emphasizing that in MAD studies, the use of the term MAD is usually not meant as an essentialized identity category, you're either MAD or you're not, but as a reference to political categories of critique and resistance, signified by the use of the uppercase MAD, like queer, deaf, Black, etc. Taking their cue, I use these terms not only as acts of reclaiming and to participate in MAD studies, but also as a symbol of critique and resistance. I do so while also fully acknowledging that these words might remain legitimately uncomfortable or dangerous for some with experiences of madness and distress. In this paper, I discuss salient elements of MAD studies. First, I explicate sanism, the type of discrimination that targets people with experiences of madness and distress. Subsequently, I examine what madness facilitates. This indiscipline foregrounds lived experiences and situates madness as a way of knowing. MAD studies rebuke sanism and resist stereotypes and stigma. It is inherently intersectional and problematizes the pervasiveness of whiteness in MAD research and activism. Rooted in activism, it thus shares commonalities with queer theory and other critical movements. MAD studies offers significant critiques of psi frameworks, while also recognizing that MAD experiences and responses to psi frameworks are multiple and not monolithic. Ultimately, it accounts for context and considers possible factors that influence or cause madness and distress. I conclude this paper with a brief discussion of what MAD studies might offer music education. Before going further, I want to position myself in relation to this work. I identify as bipolar. I therefore come to this discussion as someone with lived experiences of madness and emotional distress. I thus situate myself as part of the community with whom I'm in conversation. I was diagnosed at age 18 after a tumultuous few years in high school. Over the last 28 years, I've experienced profound depressive episodes lasting up to 13 months, mania and hypomania, and some particularly terrifying runs of mixed states. Something that has marked my journey has been my use of music. I use and have used music in equal measure to help and to harm myself when I'm in emotional distress. My personal use of music in these ways has made me aware that music can work powerfully to soothe the distress, but can also serve to worsen it. In situating myself as bipolar, I also recognize my other intersections of identity. I am a white, disabled, middle-class, Jewish, queer, cis woman. While I am bipolar, my privilege in other identity categories and my long-standing ability to pass as sane means that I do not experience the discrimination and hate often targeted at BIPOC individuals with experiences of madness and distress. Saneism disproportionately targets mad people of color. People with experiences of madness and distress face a particular kind of discrimination, saneism, that manifests in various ways, including enactment of epistemic injustice, promulgation of stereotypes, and widespread enactment of stigma. Drawing on Perlin and Poole et al., LeBlanc and Kinsella define saneism as the systematic subjugation and oppression of people who have received mental health diagnoses or are otherwise perceived to be mentally ill. Coined by activist lawyer Birnbaum and feminist lawyer Kennedy in the 1960s, saneism occurs as an identity-based prejudice alongside other isms. LeBlanc and Kinsella further contended that saneism is arguably one of the last socially accepted, government-sanctioned forms of systemic discrimination against a large social group. They observed that saneism is self-perpetuating, socially acceptable, and practiced regularly. Saneism resultantly remains pervasive as a systemically acceptable form of discrimination. MAD Studies offers a framework for understanding experiences of madness and distress and the people who have these experiences. It also works against saneism and sanist practices. I outlined several tenets of MAD Studies, noting that this discussion is not exhaustive. Centering first-person knowledge and perspectives is crucial in MAD Studies. Beresford placed the histories, cultures, and politics of mad people alongside our lived experiences and further called for us to bring the full complexity of our identities to bear. Mad experiences are multifaceted, as I have contended elsewhere, polyrhizovocal. Campbell delineated three main aspects of firsthand mad knowledge. First, knowledge of living in and receiving mental health services. Secondly, living with mental distress in society. And finally, firsthand knowledge of the interior experience of distress, the madness experience. He thus considered experience not only of the mental health system, but also context and epistemology. Within the biomedical paradigm, the psi disciplines, there has been recent interest in including the experiential knowledge of the system from those who have experiences with it. Costa et al., however, challenged the use of personal narratives by the psi systems, particularly for attempts to capture funding, support, or media coverage for the biomedical system in question. Stories are often used to benefit psi disciplines rather than to serve people most directly impacted by these systems. Centering the lived experiences of people with experiences of madness and distress challenges dominant and hegemonic understandings and offers a counterpoint to dominant normative paradigms. People with experiences of madness and or distress are often subject to epistemic injustice, invalidated in our capacities as knowers and lacking in hermeneutical resources to make sense of our experiences. MAD Studies emphasizes epistemic justice, compelling listeners to respect people with experiences of madness and or distress as knowers, and facilitating the compiling of hermeneutical resources. Emergent scholarship aims to embrace and extend new forms of mad knowledge. Indeed, we need to imagine and create a world where mental distress is viewed primarily through the eyes of people who experience it, as legitimate through challenging experiences from which value and meaning can be derived. All individuals and groups have much to learn from those who possess mad knowledge, particularly in regards to coping with distress and challenging emotions. To only look at madness as a source of knowledge about difficulties, though, is to miss the meaning, insight, and joy involved. Extending sources of knowledge to epistemologies, Legio argues it is not enough to give voice, but one must think of voice in different ways, in ways that recognize difference as legitimate rather than measuring differences against a standard of normal. Madness offers novel ways of knowing the world. Fabris wrote, "Madness is sound, but not because we live in a mad world. There is nothing mad about it either. We have identity in mad experience, in difference, not despite it. I would like to suggest that madness is not only excusable, interesting, or a version of rationality under pressure. Madness is an embodied way to know. It is intelligent, searching, and valuable. It is not regression, but a conscious reaching out, as is technical work, healing, love, or creative feeling. Purpose is not impossible in madness, but it is also not easily described in a non-normative relation to the world. As an embodied way to know, attending to people's experiences of madness and distress involves honoring different and differing epistemologies that vary from a singular normative model. Mad studies scholars therefore treat madness as a potential credible source of knowledge in its own right. Mad studies ascribes credibility and immense value to mad perspectives and eschews neuronormativity. Recognizing the diversity of ways of knowing the world and honoring these varied epistemologies makes room for the full range of contributions people with experiences of madness and/or distress may offer at the center of discourse and praxis, rather than on the margin. Mad epistemologies also resist the co-optation of mad stories by the size system for the good of the system, rather than for the people in the system. Since mad studies rebuke sanism, it provides a mechanism to resist stereotypes and stigma as forms of discrimination and oppression. Resisting sanist oppression thus remains fundamental to mad studies as a praxis discipline. Importantly, Morgan highlighted the refusal of deficit framing of madness and/or distress present in the stereotypes that circulate. Mad studies instead seeks to highlight the intelligent, searching, and valuable qualities of madness that Fabris identified. Moreover, mad studies scholars and activists work to decouple the negative associations society holds about those who experience madness and/or distress. Mad studies has often privileged the perspectives of white people with experiences of madness and distress. Whiteness is thus pervasive in this indiscipline. Change within mad scholarship has been rightfully compelled. King offered several explicit suggestions for mad studies scholars to ensure that whiteness is not accepted as the professionalized norm. 1, take analytical responsibility to explore the role of whiteness among its white academics in relation to race and misdiagnosis. 2, reflect on the ways their whiteness influenced their own position when working with Black survivor researchers. And 3, make their own whiteness explicit in the co-production process in order to produce new collaborative perspectives with Black survivor researchers. Mad studies must become attuned to potential exclusions in order to appropriately consider the perspectives of mad scholars and others with experiences of madness and/or distress. Rousseau cautioned social justice movements can become places of injustice that create their own others. Sanism intersects with heteropatriarchy, white supremacy, and classism, among other oppressive structures, and requires a complex understanding and accounting for privilege and positionality in opposition to sanism. Sanism affects and harms different groups in different ways, as do madness and distress. Quote, for example, in the UK, people from Black and minority ethnic backgrounds, as well as those living under austerity or harsh economic conditions, are much more likely to experience the hard end of mental health services, including force and coercion. Centering intersectionality facilitates our understanding how structural oppression shapes a person's experiences of madness and distress, as well as the way society perceives them. Additionally, intersectionality clarifies the differential access people have to services. Intersectionality also facilitates understanding of how different oppressive structures affect experiences. Given the whiteness of mad studies and the mad movement, accounting for ways one might receive privilege beyond one's mad identity becomes important. Fabris, for example, noticed the privilege stemming from his maleness, whiteness, able-bodiedness, anglophony, and a host of other normalcies, included capable-mindedness and voluntariness under psychiatric care and control as models of sound societies. He observed how the sanest society is indeed a place where the most sound of us excel, while the less understood lag behind, get in trouble, get held back, and get lost. The type and number of privileges one receives across a range of identities therefore amount to advantage in sanist systems. Intersectionality is also important to understanding and addressing how society views people with experiences of madness and distress. Racialized individuals and groups with such experiences are more likely to be seen as perpetrators of violence. Daly and Ben Catwick illuminated the overrepresentation of mad people as violent in the perpetrator-victim binary. Dangerousness sticks to some bodies more than others, with the stereotype of Black dangerous and mad, harming Black men in particular. Conversely, mad individuals with the kinds of dominant group privileges Fabris identified are more likely to be seen as victims. Intersections between madness and social identities often determine which side of the binary mad people are located, whether mad people are more likely to be seen as perpetrators of violence or victims of violence. Rather than elide our mad identities to address sanism over intersecting forms of oppression, I support acknowledging that such collective identities are never big enough or suitable enough to capture the many layers of social experience and therefore prove incapable of addressing them. Intersectionality allows for differentiation and nuance and is fundamental to addressing of sanism and other systems of oppression in mad studies. Mad studies has much in common with other liberation movements and their associated scholarship. Like other activist movements, the MAD movement and MAD studies aim to reclaim and politicize the term MAD that has been used pejoratively. Other movements have reappropriated and reclaimed words such as queer, crip, fat, etc. Reclaiming the term MAD as a reference to political categories of critique and resistance constitutes a politicized move that might be seen as both challenging and unsettling. Spandler and Prasanadu further suggested that explicit cross-fertilization exists between critical projects that explicitly target liberatory action, policy, and practice, notably queer, Black, and disability studies and movements. MAD studies also draws on disciplines that include sociology, anthropology, social work, cultural studies, and feminist studies, and methods and approaches for research from other educational fields such as women's studies, queer studies, critical race studies, legal studies, ethnography, and autoethnography. Many of these disciplines have liberation as a core aim, while methodologies like ethnography and autoethnography allow for the expression of personal experiences. Part of the work of MAD studies then involves building alliances with other movements and associated critical studies, learning from their triumphs and challenges. MAD studies rejects a biomedical approach to the domain widely known as mental illness or mental health and substitutes instead a framework of madness. The topic of psychiatry has been contentious within the discipline, with Burstow doing significant work calling for the abolition of psychiatry altogether. Burstow advocated for creating community supports under the supervision of people with experiences of madness or distress and allies, and adamantly opposed coercion and forced treatment in supporting people in crisis. Spandler and Prasanadu cautioned against tying MAD studies to an overtly anti-medical or anti-psychiatry position. They contended that doing so may exclude people who identify as service users who want support from psychiatry and or medication and limit what MAD studies can do as an area of knowledge production, while also noting that psychiatry is not uniform. They instead suggested an ambivalent, non-binary approach to highly contested interventions, such as psychiatric medication, recognizing such interventions as context-dependent based on the needs of individuals. Quote, criticizing the dominant of biomedical psychiatric models within the mental health services and developing alternative MAD-centered frameworks is undoubtedly centered to the MAD Studies project. However, it is also argued that MAD studies should be pluralistic and not impose another monolithic theory or ideology on survivors. That was Spandler and Prasanadu. As White observed, an intense anti-psychiatry focus may miss other considerations. This hyper-focus on psychiatry in the mental health system has left the many sites of our oppression uncontested. And even in the arena that we do contest, the mental health system, our advocacy typically neither acknowledges nor challenges the root cause of the oppression and discrimination that effectively results in our erasure from society. I reject dogma about psychiatry in favor of pluralistic and context-dependent considerations to reveal what else MAD studies might make possible. MAD studies strongly considers the role of contextual factors in any discussion of madness and distress, shifting focus from the biomedical model to socially situated understandings of such experiences. Individuals may experience distress based on a range of factors, including but not limited to poverty, trauma, systemic violence, oppression, forced migration, war, persecution, climate disasters, loss, medical procedures, a global pandemic, and recovering from or witnessing an accident. A social understanding of madness and/or distress takes these contextual factors into account, which is crucial to understanding a person's experience holistically. When the only explanation given is clinical and biomedical, the complex web of factors that might lead to experiences of madness and distress go unacknowledged and discounted. Canton explained, the biomedical approach to subjective suffering causes a person's experience in the world to be decontextualized and reduced to the clinical picture they present when they first encounter mental health services. All the possible causes for the person's diverse manifestations, like adverse childhood experiences, traumas, the experience of multiple oppressions, or just a different way of being in the world, are amputated at once and replaced by a supposed malfunction of fancy named neurotransmitters in the brain. MAD studies ensures consideration of contextual factors that may influence experiences of madness and/or distress. Doing so enables contributions to hermeneutic resources that facilitate a holistic look at these experiences. MAD studies foregrounds lived experiences and centers mad or distressed people. It refuses epistemic injustice and values madness as offering distinct ways of knowing. It resists Satanism and its associated stereotypes and stigma. MAD studies is also intersectional. It is self-conscious of its whiteness and seeks to address the centering of white voices in discourse about madness and distress. It also draws on other critical theories and liberation movements. Furthermore, it takes a critical and nuanced stance on psychiatry and takes into account, one, considering experiences of madness and distress. Takes context into account, Hence, MAD studies offers a powerful counterpoint to normative paradigms for understanding experience. Given these elements of MAD studies, this discipline has a great deal to offer music education. In the context of music education, I argue that room exists to honor a full range of epistemologies and ways of knowing the world, including MAD epistemologies. In music education scholarship, MAD voices are absent, or at the very least, underrepresented or unacknowledged as such. Indeed, people with experiences of madness and/or distress are often relegated to the margin by mainstream music education discourse and praxis, viewed as a problem. Discussions of wellness in music education typically focus on social emotional learning, SEL, drawing on the collaborative for academic, social, and emotional learning, CASEL framework. The stated aims of SEL are to foster self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness in relation to emotions. It has also, however, been heavily critiqued for being neoliberal, racist, and more focused on compliance than vibrant emotional well-being. Simmons went so far to call SEL white supremacy with a hug. Music educators require a more robust discussion of the possibilities music offers for emotional well-being that centers the perspectives of people with experiences of madness and/or distress. MAD studies makes a holistic view of students and teachers possible, one that considers the full range of contextual factors influencing their distress with the aim to ameliorate it. In doing so, it also refuses the pathologization of students who do not conform to classroom management standards. Moreover, MAD studies does not take the medical approach to distress so prevalent in the school system, instead seeking a more social and structural solution. As a music educator, I explicitly look for ways that MAD studies might support the students and teachers with experiences of madness and/or distress in ways that draw on the potential of our discipline. Music clearly offers both ways to soothe the distress and to worsen it. I suggest music educators might learn to harness music's ability to help and both respect and intentionally work against music's ability to harm. Once music educators recognize these possibilities, we can explicitly teach students how to use and engage with music in ways that might help, through, for example, songwriting and listening practices, or etc. And also make them aware of how music might exacerbate distress. Then we can consider how we might work together to create a MAD-affirming music education in counterpoint with the dominant music education paradigm. I look forward to your questions in the conversation. Thank you so much.